There is a version of Florida sold in brochures. Turquoise water, white sand, a pelican gliding low over a calm inlet, the light hitting the surface just right at sunset. That Florida exists. It is real, and it is photographed a million times a day, printed on postcards, framed in the lobbies of beachfront hotels, used to sell timeshares to people from colder places who have never once asked what lives in the water behind the photograph. But underneath that version, moving through the same canals, the same retention ponds, the same slow brown rivers that cut through golf courses and subdivisions and half-built developments still waiting on their second phase, is a second Florida that almost nobody photographs, because almost nobody looks. It is not hidden in some far corner of the Everglades, sealed off behind a park entrance fee and a ranger station. It is behind the house. It is under the dock. It is in the water hazard on the back nine, the one the golfers curse when their ball rolls in and then simply take the drop rather than wade after it. And the people who live closest to that second Florida have gotten remarkably good at not seeing it at all, not because it hides especially well, because acknowledging it on a daily basis would mean living differently, and nobody wants to live differently in paradise. This is a story about three predators sharing the same water at the same time, in numbers that resist an accurate count no matter how many biologists are assigned to try, in a state that has quietly decided not to look too closely at any of them, not because the danger is invisible, because counting it honestly would mean admitting how much of it there actually is, and admitting that would change how the whole state talks about its own water. Before we start, if this is the kind of thing that stays with you after the lights go out, go ahead and subscribe, and while you're here, tell me where you're watching from. I want to know how far this reaches, and I read every comment. Let's start with the one that arrived by accident, because its origin story is the strangest of the three, and it sets the tone for everything that follows. In the 1980s and into the 1990s, Burmese pythons began showing up in the canals bordering the Everglades. Some accounts trace the beginning of it to a single warehouse near Homestead, destroyed during Hurricane Andrew in August of 1992. Its cargo of exotic snakes scattered into the surrounding wetlands overnight in the chaos of the storm, with no one left to account for what had escaped. Other accounts point instead to decades of quiet, individual releases by pet owners who bought a hatchling python at 18 inches long, thinking it was a manageable animal, and discovered a few years later that it had become an 8 or 10-foot constrictor with an appetite no suburban household could accommodate. Rather than surrender it, some simply drove to the edge of the Everglades and let it go into the canal, telling themselves it would either die out there or become someone else's problem. The truth of the python's arrival is probably both stories, layered on top of each other across 30 years, a slow accumulation rather than a single dramatic release. What matters is what happened after. The python did not struggle in the Everglades the way an invasive species is supposed to struggle in a new environment. It thrived, almost immediately and almost completely. The subtropical climate of South Florida matched its native range in Southeast Asia, closely enough that the snake barely had to adjust. The wetlands offered endless cover in the sog, endless prey moving through the shallows and the hammocks, and critically, no natural predator in the ecosystem, large enough or numerous enough to push back against an adult female that can exceed 15 feet and lay dozens of eggs in a single clutch. Researchers have never been able to put a confident, final number on how many pythons now move through the wetlands, canals, and preserve lands of South Florida. Estimates offered publicly over the years by wildlife agencies and academic researchers have ranged from the tens of thousands into the hundreds of thousands, and the scientists who study the species are the first to admit, without hesitation, that the true figure could sit anywhere inside that range, or beyond either edge of it. A snake built by evolution to remain unseen does not lend itself to a census. It does not call. It does not leave obvious tracks in standing water, and it can go weeks between meals, lying motionless in cover the entire time. What is not in dispute, because it has been measured directly through repeated surveys, is the effect the python's arrival has had on everything smaller than it. Studies of the Everglades backcountry conducted in the years since the python's spread have recorded a collapse in sightings of raccoons, opossums, bobcats, and white-tailed deer along the same survey routes researchers had used for decades before the snake arrived. Some local populations down by more than 90% in the areas most heavily affected. An animal with no evolutionary memory of a 100-pound ambush predator in the grass simply had no defense to offer. No instinct built for it. No reason to run from something its body had never been warned about. And the python does not stay politely inside the boundary of the park. It has been found in storm drains running beneath residential streets. It has been found coiled in garages, mistaken at first glance for a discarded hose. It has been found under the porches of houses built along canals that connect, eventually, through miles of engineered waterway, to the exact wetlands everyone assumed stopped at a fence line in a visitor center. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission now pays contracted hunters by the foot to go looking for pythons, snake by snake, in a landscape too vast and too wet and too thick with cover for any team to ever fully clear. Some hunters have brought in animals close to 20 feet long. Most nights, most hunters find nothing at all. which tells you less about how few pythons are out there than about how well the ones that remain have learned to stay hidden. The denial here is geographic, and it is almost a kind of comfort people build for themselves on purpose. People draw a mental line at the edge of the Everglades, somewhere around the toll booth or the last exit ramp before the swamp starts, and tell themselves that whatever lives inside that line stays inside it. The canals were never built with that line in mind. Water does not recognize a county boundary, and neither does anything swimming through it. Now go to the water itself, because the python is only the newest resident of it, and it is very far from the largest, or the oldest, or in some ways, the most dangerous. The American alligator was here first, long before the canals, long before the drainage projects that turned half the state into buildable land, and it never really left, not for a single decade of Florida's development. Florida's alligator population is estimated at somewhere well over 1 million animals, spread through nearly every county that holds standing fresh or brackish water, which in a state shaped the way Florida is shaped, means nearly every county, period. That means the retention pond behind the strip mall, dug specifically to hold stormwater runoff and landscaped afterward with a fountain to make it look intentional. That means the golf course lake, stocked with nothing but its own quiet, self-sustaining ecosystem of fish, turtles, wading birds, and whatever moved in on its own once the water settled. That means the canal at the end of the cul-de-sac where kids used to swim on hot afternoons before anyone thought seriously to ask what actually lived in it, or before the HOA quietly put up a sign that everyone learned to stop reading. An adult male alligator commonly exceeds 10 feet in length and several hundred pounds in weight, an ambush predator built by evolution to hold perfectly still at the waterline for hours at a stretch, invisible to prey and to people alike until the precise moment it chooses not to be. Its eyes and the ridge of its snout sit just above the surface. The rest of its body submerged and unreadable, patient in a way that very few land animals are built to be patient. It can wait longer than a person can stay interested in watching the water. Florida logs alligator bites nearly every year across the state, and fatalities, while genuinely rare set against a population that size and a human population that shares water with it constantly, do happen, most often in water that the person involved had already quietly decided was safe long before anything went wrong. Wildlife officials interviewed after these incidents are remarkably consistent on one specific point. Repeated so often it has become something close to doctrine among the people who study the species. The dangerous alligator, the one that approaches instead of retreating, is almost always the habituated one, the individual animal that learned, through some human's careless generosity, that people mean food rather than threat. That transformation happens gradually, one tossed piece of bread or one thrown fish carcass at a time, in the exact ponds and canals where children play barefoot. In the grass along the edge. An alligator that has never been fed wants almost nothing to do with a person. It will slide off the bank and vanish the moment it registers movement nearby, choosing the deep water over any kind of confrontation, because confrontation costs it energy and offers it nothing. An alligator that has been fed, even once, even by someone who meant it kindly, begins to associate the sound of footsteps or the shadow of a person at the water's edge with an easy meal, and that association does not reverse itself. It compounds, pond by pond, summer by summer, until the state has an animal on its hands that behaves nothing like the wary reptile biology intended it to be. There is also the matter of scale that people rarely stop to do the arithmetic on. A state holding over 1 million alligators, spread across a human population well past 20 million people concentrated along the coasts and around the same lakes, rivers, and canal systems the alligators depend on. This is not a state with a small overlap problem. It is a state where the overlap is close to total, where an honest map of alligator habitat and an honest map of Florida real estate would very nearly be the same map, drawn at 2 different scales. Here is where the story stops being 2 separate predators living politely in the same state, and becomes something considerably stranger, because the python and the alligator have started to meet each other, and not as strangers simply passing through the same stretch of marsh on different errands. Researchers studying the Everglades have documented direct predation running both directions between the 2 species, pythons killing and consuming alligators, and alligators killing and consuming pythons, sometimes with the remains of one recovered from inside the stomach of the other during a neck. In one widely reported case that circulated well beyond the scientific journals it was first published in, a python was found that had attempted to swallow an alligator whole and had ruptured in the process. Both animals dead, locked together in the sawgrass in a tableau that looked engineered for shock but was, in the most literal sense possible, simply 2 apex predators occupying the same water at the same time, each one large enough and hungry enough to treat the other as prey rather than as a rival worth avoiding. It reads, retold now, like something built deliberately for a headline, but at the time, to the researchers who found it, it was simply data. One more entry in a slowly accumulating record of a landscape with no historical precedent for this kind of standoff. Alligators evolved in the Everglades over millions of years without ever needing a strategy for an animal like the Burmese python. because no animal like the Burmese python had ever been part of that ecosystem before. In a landscape with no rulebook for this particular collision, the wetlands themselves became the uncontrolled experiment, running in real time, with no one able to say for certain how it ends, and underneath both of them, moving through water that connects to neither the python's canals nor the alligator's ponds, by any obvious boundary that a map would show you, is the third animal on this list, the one people are least prepared to think about at all, because it is not supposed to be there in the first place, and everything about how people learn to read water tells them it shouldn't be. The bull shark can do something almost no other large shark species is built to do. It can regulate the salt concentration in its own body well enough to move freely and repeatedly between the open ocean and pure fresh water, using that ability to travel astonishing distances upstream into rivers that most people would never in 100 years associate with a shark. In Florida, bull sharks have been documented far up the St. Johns River, well inland from any beach, in water that looks, smells, moves, and in every practical sense behaves exactly like an ordinary freshwater river, because for all functional purposes, it is one. Juvenile bull sharks in particular use these inland tannin-stained stretches as nurseries, sheltered water where they can spend their first several years growing in relative safety before eventually moving back down toward the coast and the open Gulf. A mature female bull shark can reach 11 feet in length and several hundred pounds, thick-bodied and powerfully built in a way that looks almost stocky compared to the sleeker profile most people picture when they imagine a shark. It holds a reputation among researchers as one of the more consistently aggressive shark species when it feels cornered or provoked, in part simply because it is so frequently encountered in shallow, murky, close to shore water where visibility is poor and surprise encounters are common on both sides. The line everyone assumes exists, the one separating shark water from safe water, from swimming hole water, from family fishing dock water, simply is not there for this particular animal. It never has been. To the bull shark, the river is not a refuge from the ocean it left behind. It is more of the same territory, extended inland, following food and warmth wherever both happen to lead. This is the part of the state nobody wants to hold in their head all at once, because held together, it stops sounding like three separate wildlife stories and starts sounding like a single uncomfortable fact about the water itself. A canal that might carry a python from the sawgrass to a suburban backyard on any given night. A pond that has held the same alligator for so many years it has effectively become a neighbor, pointed out to visiting relatives the way you'd point out a landmark. A river reaching inland that might, on any given afternoon, be carrying something that swam up from the Gulf weeks earlier and has been quietly growing in the tannin dark water ever since. 3 different redditors, 3 entirely different origin stories, and one shared, connected body of water threading through all of it, appearing on no official map as anything more dramatic than scenery. A blue line drawn between green space and gray development. The people who live alongside this rarely think about it in those terms day to day. And that is not carelessness so much as a kind of necessary agreement everyone in the state has made without ever discussing it openly. Nobody can go about an ordinary day mentally cataloging every pond, canal, and drainage ditch within reach as active habitat for 3 separate apex predators, each capable of killing a person under the wrong circumstances. So the mind files it away, quietly, the way it files away every background risk that would be exhausting to hold in constant focus. The gator in the retention pond becomes a fixture, almost a mascot. A thing pointed out to visitors with a laugh rather than a thing to be genuinely wary of. The python stays a rumor from the evening news, something that happens in some other county, to some other family, never quite this street. The bull shark barely registers as a possibility at all, because the water in question simply does not look like shark water. It looks, in every way the eye is trained to judge, like a river, and rivers are supposed to be safe in a way. The ocean never fully promised to be, and yet the wildlife agencies tracking all 3 keep arriving at the same conclusion, phrased slightly differently in each report but landing, every time, in the same place. Nobody has an exact count, not of the pythons moving through the sawgrass and the canal banks night after night, not of the alligators sharing water with a state of over 20 million residents and tens of millions of annual visitors, and not of how far inland the bull sharks are willing to travel in a given year as the water itself keeps warming. What exists instead of a number is a pattern of confirmed encounters, camera trap footage, necropsy reports, GPS tag data pulled off tracked individuals, each one a single data point in a picture nobody, no matter how well funded the research grant, has managed to fully complete. There is a reason this matters beyond the simple discomfort of it, beyond the campfire story quality the whole subject naturally carries. An apex predator population, especially an unmonitored and poorly counted one, does not sit still in the landscape the way people quietly assume it does. The python spread has already reshaped the food web of the Everglades in ways researchers are still measuring years later. A documented collapse in mid-sized mammals that ripples outward into everything those animals used to eat, to disperse the seeds of, or keep in check through their own presence. The alligator, for all its long ancient history in the state, it becomes a functionally different kind of animal the moment humans begin feeding it, shifting from a wary, avoidant predator that treats people as a threat to be avoided into one that actively approaches, associating the shoreline with an easy meal rather than danger. And the bull shark's growing documented presence in warming inland waters is being watched closely by researchers, precisely because rising water temperatures appear to be pushing the species into new nursery grounds considerably further from the coast than historical records from even 20 years ago would suggest was normal. None of this is presented by the scientists actually doing the tracking as an argument for panic, and it would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. Florida's wildlife agencies are consistent, almost repetitive, in noting that the actual risk to any individual person, on any individual afternoon, on any individual stretch of water, remains genuinely low, and that the overwhelming majority of encounters between people and any of these three animals end quietly, with the animal retreating the moment it registers a human presence nearby. The python is not hunting neighborhoods block by block. The alligator, left unfed and unprovoked across its whole life, wants nothing whatsoever to do with a person twice its patience and none of its caution. The bull shark, more often than not, is simply passing through water it has every biological right to occupy, on its way somewhere else, indifferent to the people floating nearby on inner tubes. But low individual risk is not the same thing as no water, and no water is not what Florida actually has, not anywhere, not really. What it has instead is an enormous, deeply connected, and largely unmapped system of canals, ponds, rivers, and wetlands, built up around and directly through a landscape that was apex predator habitat for millions of years, before it was anybody's backyard, anybody's golf course, or anybody's club. The state did not remove that food web when it poured the subdivisions and the fairways and the strip malls on top of it. It simply built over it, layer by layer, decade by decade, and mostly agreed, without ever voting on the matter, not to look down too closely while doing so. So here, stripped of everything nobody can actually prove, is what is known for certain. The Everglades hold a python population large enough that hunters paid specifically, by the foot, to find and remove them can work an entire season through the sawgrass and still barely make a visible dent in the total. Florida's alligators number well over 1 million, spread through water that borders far more homes, schools, and public parks than most residents could accurately name if you handed them a map and asked. And bull sharks, quietly, patiently, without any single dramatic incident to announce it, keep pushing further upriver than the picture in most people's heads accounts for, following warmer water and shifting prey into territory that used to belong, as far as anyone's grandparents remembered it, only to catfish and largemouth bass. None of the three predators arrived according to any conspiracy, and none of them are advancing according to any plan a person could point to and hold responsible. They are simply doing what predators have always done, following food, following temperature, following the path of least resistance through a landscape that happens, almost everywhere you could stand in this particular state, to be wet. The retention pond behind the office park, the canal at the end of the street where a dog goes missing every couple of years and nobody quite says why out loud, the river the whole family has floated on inner tubes every summer for a decade without incident. All of it, in one connected way or another, links to the same water the python, the alligator, and the bull shark already consider, without asking anyone's permission, to be home. The pelican still glides low over the calm inlet in the postcard version of the state, and that Florida is not a lie, not even a small one. It coexists, quietly and constantly, with the other Florida, the one holding still beneath the surface of every pond and canal and slow brown river, waiting the way it has always waited, patient in a way nothing built by a person ever quite manages to be, entirely indifferent to which version of the state the person standing at the water's edge has chosen, on that particular afternoon, to believe in. What is left, at the end of it, is not a warning so much as an accounting. A python population no one has finished counting, an alligator in nearly every pond deep enough to hold one, a shark that ignored the one boundary everyone assumed it would respect, and a state built, quite literally, on top of all three, going about its ordinary business. One.com. Sunlit afternoon at a time that there is a particular kind of quiet that settles over Florida water in the last hour before dark, when the golf courses empty out and the retention ponds go still and the first dock lights click on along the canal banks. It is the same quiet every single evening, in every county. Whether or not anything happens to be moving beneath the surface that night, that is the part almost nobody accounts for when they picture where the danger actually lives. It is not a single place on a map. It is a time of day, repeated without exception, in water that never once stopped being what it always was, long before anyone built a dock, a fairway, or a subdivision on top of it.